And welcome to the Viking Codecast. My name is Erik Trautman, founder of Viking Code School, and I'm here with Jessica Chan, who's a web engineer, designer, writer, and editor, all sorts of different things. She's come up from a non-traditional background via design path and is currently working over at Pinterest, and is here today to talk to us about a major project that she took on at Pinterest around reorganizing the way that the whole site is presented, which is essentially the meat of what we're going to hear about today. But just to give you an insight into why we're here, the Viking Codecast is a regular series of conversations with established developers and others in the industry, so that you can basically see what's going on behind the curtain, and they can provide some wisdom back and forth, so that we can learn a little bit about what's going on the other side. So I'm really excited to welcome you, Jessica. And I guess the first question that I'd have for you is really just who are you? How can we get to know you and the path that you took to get to us a little bit better?
Sure. So hi, I'm Jessica. It's really nice to be here. I started coding when I was a kid, so I borrowed an HTML book from the library when I was like 12 years old, and I started just coding personal web pages and signed up for every single free hosting company available, like GeoCities, Tripod, Angel, all that stuff. It was free, and I just started making fun websites for myself through middle school, through high school, and college. I was just playing around. In college, I didn't major in computer science. I actually majored in English and economics. But on the side, I actually started getting into freelance for graphic design for websites. And these clients I kept actually for years after I graduated. It was a pretty awesome way to make side money in college. And after that, I still didn't go the technical route after college. I went into corporate marketing at first. I thought I was going to be like a corporate marketing manager. And then I went into project management. And then I went into becoming like an editor. I thought I was going to be an editor. So my career kind of meandered a bit. But after that, or during that whole time, I still freelanced on the side coding web pages. So eventually I did decide to take it full time and do design and development as a hybrid after full time for a small agency. And then I went from that small agency to a larger company, and I joined the design team also as a hybrid. And because I was kind of lonely, it felt like I was learning by myself. I was doing a lot of coding by myself. I wasn't really interacting with other developers. So that was my move to a bigger company. And then at that company, I also moved to the engineering team from the design team because somebody convinced me that engineering was a path to take rather than trying to do both or try to be good at both design and engineering. That was really hard. And being able to focus and actually be in an engineering organization and really learn about cadences and sprints, and they were really hardcore with agile methodology, so I got to really be agile-y. That was just eye-opening for me and kind of life-changing. So being an engineer, committed to being an engineer, I learned a lot. I ramped up, especially on JavaScript, especially on building client-side applications. And then I got a recruiting email from a very big company. I got a recruiting email from Facebook, and that actually motivated me to see if I could do it. And a lot of that involved learning stuff that I didn't learn before. So I got an email from Facebook saying okay, here's the prep. Make sure that you know these things. And these things included algorithms, data structures, and I was like, oh no, what are those? So I just went on study mode at night, evenings. I just borrowed a lot of books, again, almost to reprise what I did when I was 12. But I borrowed a lot of books from the library. There was one that was really helpful called Data Structures and Algorithms in JavaScript because I didn't know C++. I was mainly front end, so I basically implemented like binary sort, all these like different algorithms, all these different data structures, linked list, double linked list. Like I kind of had to learn what those were on my own, and I didn't get Facebook, but I did get Pinterest. So I was able to move from that company to Pinterest, and here I've just grown immensely. Like it's been amazing to work here, and I feel like very lucky every day. And there was a really big project that I'm at the tail end of right now that is basically what I'm going to be talking about today. But
Cool.
that kind of summarizes like my journey here.
Thanks. Yeah, it sounds like the path that you've taken. So basically, I mean, as both a designer and a coder, I think that officially makes you a unicorn. So no.
Because that juncture where I decided to be a full engineer was a very difficult choice, but in the end, like it was so hard to be good at both. Like there were designers that were so good, and there were engineers that were so good, and I just felt like being both the unicorn. I almost think is like truly a myth, but who knows? There could be definitely people much more talented than I am that can do well at both. But for me, like I don't think I could learn everything I needed to learn to be a good engineer and be a good designer at the same time, just for me personally.
So why exactly did you make that shift over from the? I mean, obviously, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about code is that it's not creative. I mean, it is very creative. It's very creative,
Definitely.
but in a different way as
Right.
design. So how did you go from that the graphic level creativity to the code level creativity, and why did that become the right choice for you?
I think maybe it had to do with the way I was really seeking challenges at the time, and it might have been different. My life might have turned out differently if I was in a different position, or if I was in maybe a different company, or what. But at that time, I think the technical challenges were just so much more rewarding to me, and I really wanted to pursue it. And at that company, there wasn't really room for somebody to dive into that as well as succeed on the design level as well. So I think that my choice was more about following what at the time was going to make me the happiest. And it's true that technical engineering challenges are so different from design challenges. So I think that it was either make a choice or just kind of be unhappy in both worlds.
Nice. Well, so the other question I had was actually about the mindset of a designer versus the mindset of an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think carries over from one to the other? Do you think that being a good designer makes you a good engineer, or vice versa? Or how do those two cross?
It's funny because I've been an engineer now for like 3+ years, and so like the design side is kind of slipping from me. But I remember design being a lot about they both have elements of iteration. So there's that phase where you're not even on a computer. Like I remember as a designer using a pencil and paper and like sketching out ideas, sketching out layouts, like putting together compositions, and in code as well, like having that architecture out first, just doing that exploration, that kind of like hit and miss, like crumpling the stuff throw in the trash can type phase, and then you go and you get more clarity, and you get, my process at least is to like get a pencil and paper and just kind of write out like APIs and code. So I think those two were very similar. I feel like design is different in that it's a lot about presentation, like knowing what your stakeholders need and making sure that you're meeting the requirements and that you're kind of iterating on the requests coming in and what you know about who the client is. Engineering is interesting because it's like kind of combining everything that you know with everything you're like discovering about the system that you're implementing it into, and it's almost like the client is like good practices and like all this stuff. So it's I don't know, it's a little different. Design I think is more about people and making sure that what you're doing communicates and speaks to the person you're doing it for, and engineering is a lot more about like designing great systems that work well and follow really good principles and things like that.
Right. Thank you. Well, I know you had some stuff that you wanted to show us about, speaking of
Sure.
engineering, about a project that you'd worked with.
Yeah, so yeah, just to touch upon, I guess the main topic of this presentation is I know that when I was first starting as an engineer, I was getting a lot of projects that were pretty well scoped. You know, it was technically challenging, but also you know, the end result was pretty clear. And one thing that I wanted to share was my experience in taking on a bigger project that was a little less well defined and impacted a lot of people, which was really challenging for me because that's just something I haven't ever done before. I've never rolled out a project this large on this scale. So I guess this is more my story and not necessarily like advice for everyone. So I just want to make that clear. Like I just want to kind of share my experience and hopefully there's some takeaways that you can then apply for yourselves. But mainly I wanted to just share. So I will bring up a slide. And what I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to attempt to describe the scope of the project in pretty simple terms so that you can kind of walk through this story with me. So I don't feel like you have to understand like everything, but I'm going to try to scope it down and make sure that you can.
Would you prefer to have questions wait till the end, or kind of just group up in the middle?
No, I'm happy to answer questions throughout if you'd like.
Okay. So while you fire that up, I'll just make a note that we do have a Q&A app in the Google Hangout on air here. So
Okay.
if you're in the local Hangout, you guys are welcome to unmute and ask questions whenever you want. For anyone who's outside, there's this little Q&A app. I think it's at the top of your screen. There's a drop-down menu, and it's a little blue thing. And basically, if you pop a question in there, it'll go in the queue, and we'll be able to answer it when we get to it. So
Cool.
feel free to do that.
Okay. Let's see. Is everyone able to see this?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so most of you, I think, will be familiar with Pinterest.com, how it works. You basically search for something that you want to see, and Pinterest is really good at serving images that match your criteria. Great for, you know, hobbyists and people who want ideas, clothing ideas, I don't know, beard ideas. Apparently that's very popular. So Pinterest.com is actually made up of hundreds of modules. So every single thing that's outlined in red here and more, things that are inside of these red things, are all individual modules that are reused over and over again in the site. So basically, in our code base, everything's a module. We try to reuse as much as we can. Button module is an example. We have a pin module. We have lots of modules. So I'm just going to go into a little bit about how we serve Pinterest.com when you actually type it into your browser. So just a really quick overview is when you type Pinterest.com, that request goes to our server. And our server sends back the HTML back to your browser, plus some JavaScript and other stuff. But the important part to remember here is that when the server actually takes that request and gets all the HTML, it's using this engine called Jinja. It's a Python engine. And what happens is that initial request that's coming from the browser and goes straight to the server, that only happens once. That happens on the very first time you type out Pinterest and you send it. After that, what happens is every time you click around or you want to look at a pin or something like that, the JavaScript then takes over and it starts to handle all these events, these clicks and these the scrolling and everything like that. And what it does is when you do click on a pin and you see the pin appear in your browser, the browser doesn't then make a huge page reload or anything like that. You can actually see that the pin is showing up on your browser, you know, right away. And that's what we call client rendered. The client is doing the rendering of the HTML or the re-rendering of the HTML. And what the client's using is something called nunjucks. So what you have to remember is server, Jinja, Python, client, JavaScript, nunjucks. So is that pretty clear so far? Yeah, okay. Okay, so knowing that, this is a quick, just a little snippet of like what our template looks like. So here's a template that sets a variable called greeting, sets a variable called name. They're getting it from some kind of data source, and it just prints out greeting, name, welcome to Pinterest. Jinja and Nunjucks are ports of each other, meaning that they can see this code, this template code, and they both can read it. So it's nice because on the server side, we use Jinja to parse this template, and then when the user then goes and clicks around on the site, they use Nunjucks, and we can reuse the same templates on those hundreds of modules around the site. And Nunjucks is able to just read it and spit out the same thing. So that's great. Everything is great. There's nothing that needs to be changed, right? There's some not so great things about this. First of all, when Jinja goes ahead and parses this template, we actually have to add utilities and libraries in Python in order for Jinja to use them. But any utilities or libraries that we need to add that Jinja uses then also needs to be added to the Nunjucks instance on the client. So we have duplication here, and that's not great. There are also some language differences between Python and JavaScript that are very inconvenient for developers. There's truthiness differences, and there's some other language-specific differences that give our developers a lot of headaches, plus having to implement a utility twice in 2 different languages. That's kind of annoying. But other than that, right, everything's okay. You know, everything runs. People are getting their pins. That's great. So what's the big deal? Why do we need to change anything? Well, Pinterest and our platform is really interested in new technology. So right now we're running the client's application on Backbone. We have Django on the server side. We have Jinja and Nunjucks. Great. However, we heard about this really cool technology called React, and we want to move to it. We've kind of weighed a lot of the pros and cons and decided, yay, React is totally the way to go. Let's go. So in order to get from here to React, what we need to do is we need to somehow get the server rendering React templates, because look, they look completely different, right? If we change one, we have to change the other because, like I said, server and client are sharing the templates. So if we change from Nunjucks/Jinja template syntax to React syntax, we're going to need to make sure they're both running React. However, there's no Python React. So somehow we're going to need to get our server, which is Django, which has tons of code in it in our application logic, to call JavaScript somehow so that we can server render React templates. And then we also, while we're doing this, we'd like to share those utilities and libraries among the server and the client. So there's a big problem there because, to get from here to here or from here to here, that's huge. We can't just shut Pinterest down for a couple months and convert all of our templates and tell everyone to wait until we're done. We need to find a way to make this change iteratively so that we don't interrupt the many developers developing new features on the site, and we don't interrupt the experience of all the users that are going to our sites, which is a lot of users. So we developed a roadmap to get from our current state to here. And I didn't do the entire roadmap. I only did a piece of that roadmap, and that roadmap piece I'm calling server-side Nunjucks. So what this does is this actually gets our server to call Nunjucks. Why aren't we calling React? Well, in order to do this incrementally, we want to be able to just take that first baby step, which is just have our server be able to even call JavaScript, even though it's Python, and then have it read the templates that are currently being shared between server and client. And then from here, we can then start iteratively changing the templates. So instead of going straight from Jinja to React, there's this intermediate step. Let's try to get the server to call nunjucks instead, and then we can focus on switching out the template engine. Once the server and the client are using the same engine, once they're both using nunjucks, it'll be much easier to change both of them out for React. So that made a lot of sense. So again, this was my project, and I had to do it while hundreds of developers were still developing and millions of users were visiting the site. We can't tell them to stop, like I said. So the first step for me was exploration, and here is kind of my first approach to this project, which, looking back, I think I could have done a little bit more efficiently. I didn't come into Pinterest like knowing all this, so I definitely had to dive into the code base and just figure out like what was our application logic doing. I'd never worked with Django before. What does Django do? I'd never worked with Backbone before. What does Backbone do? Routing, middleware. I basically like traced the life of a request through the entire application, and it took a lot of notes and like annotated the code everywhere. This was fine. I think that's something that anyone should do when they first join a company anyway, like get really familiar with the stack, get really familiar with whatever part of the code that you're definitely going to be working in. However, I would say that this was not the most efficient use of my time for this project specifically. I actually didn't really need to know that much about, for example, the routing or even Django, really, or Backbone. All I was really focused on was the utilities and the libraries and the template renderers. So so all that stuff that is around it, like routing, middleware, app logic, Django data, I didn't really need to know that much about that. So I guess my takeaway here is exploration takes time, but you don't need to know everything to change something. The advice given to me was to get a general sense of what everything does and just dive deep in the system that needs to change and expand your knowledge incrementally. One of my hesitations when I started this project was, how can I refactor this entire engine without even knowing everything about this whole system? And it turns out that a lot of people way more senior than me give me the advice of like, oh yeah, I don't know anything about the whole system. Yeah, I just kind of hack into the part that I need to hack into. So that really kind of gave me a little more courage to say like, okay, you know what? I don't need to know everything about everything. I just need to go in and try something out. So that's kind of my first takeaway here. And I don't want to keep talking and talking and talking. Should I give like breaks for questions or anything like that in between slides?
Why not? Let's just see if anyone has anything queued up. So like I said earlier, this is designed to be interactive, so please ask questions. If you're here locally, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask, and if you're viewing online, feel free to drop your question in the little Q&A app on the Google Hangout on air, and we'll see it. So if there are any questions, fire away.
Yeah, I had one. I was just wondering, so I know a little bit about React. I know that it's like the hottest new thing as far as the JavaScript ecosystem, but I haven't really done a lot with JavaScript. But basically, my question is, what are you guys' reasons for transitioning to React? Like, what are the pros there as far as? Because it's like it's a huge undertaking, I'm sure, to transition, and so I'm sure that the pros there must be a pretty long list of pros.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have time to go through all of them, but some of the major ones are, first of all, it's open source. What's great about that is a lot of our code currently is kind of a Frankenstein backbone custom modules rendering system, module tree rendering system. So with React, it does a lot of what our custom code does, but it's open source and it's well supported. So instead of having to like maintain documentation, for example, to onboard new developers, we could just point to the React tutorial and say, hey, this, just go do that. And we're actually moving as in general to kind of more open source type stuff, to either open source our own stuff or to consume more open source stuff, just because the power of that community really is a multiplier in terms of onboarding. There's also performance gains to be had. React performance on Node server, React virtual DOM just leads to just crazy performance increases and performance gains. The way that we're re-rendering currently with our current architecture, we're completely destroying and reconstructing the DOM, whereas React Virtual DOM is a lot smarter about diffing the DOM trees and enacting that on the browser. So things like that, performance, developer productivity. There's an ecosystem around React, like we're using Jest right now. Having a little bit of trouble with Jest code coverage, but Jest itself is a great testing framework that we're pretty excited about. And yeah, just in general, like Redux, the way that React has opinions about the way we should be propagating data around the application, and a lot of those patterns we're pretty on board with. So yeah, those are just a few of the reasons, but yeah, it's pretty neat so far, learning about it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'll continue. The next slide talks about, so that was exploration, just kind of like diving in and just not feeling like I needed to know everything about everything in order to just start hacking. So where to actually start? So here's another example. I did a lot of prototyping and a lot of hacking into various parts of the code where I assumed rendering happened or had to do with rendering. And I was just trying to get something to work. So iteratively, I was just trying to say, okay, I want to see this. And then I would try to hack the code to make that happen. And as I was doing that, I was learning more and more about the code. So I think that in the beginning, that spirit of exploration and that spirit of having an expectation, I want this to work, so let's see what this does. I want that to work, let's see what that does, was good. But then it came time to figure out how to roll this out to production. And a little background, Pinterest has an experimentation framework that allows me to say, okay, like let's experiment this new code on just a few users. And I'll go into that a little bit later. It's an amazing framework. I haven't worked in many companies, so I don't know if all companies have this. I know that a lot of companies and a lot of people are familiar with A/B testing, but the way Pinterest approaches it is pretty amazing. Again, I'll go into that later. But anyway, the point is I needed to find a place in the code where I could fork the code and make it so that the system went to my new rendering system in one place, so I can turn it on and off, almost like a light switch. So here, I had to find one place where instead of Python using Jinja, it would actually use what we call a sidecar node process. So what happens is we have a Python process serving the website. We're actually spawning up another process that's running Node, which is a JavaScript interpreter, or a JavaScript engine, and it actually gets a request from Python and spits back out HTML using nunjucks. So ultimately, this was the way that we would have Python calling nunjucks or JavaScript code. So here, this was kind of my takeaway from that, was find that place where the system interfaces with the piece you need to change and hack that place, if you can. So this caveat, if you can. I'm lucky in that Pinterest code was pretty modular. There was really nice interfaces between the systems. The systems were pretty orthogonal. It was like this system did something, that system did something else. This system expects this response from this other system. So I was able to kind of hack that response and say, okay, when the application calls render and Jinja gives it back this, I was able to say, okay, let's have this application call render and if these conditions are met, actually use my new system to return back the HTML. So I was returning back the same response as Jinja, but the application was calling my code rather than Jinja's at this one place in the fork. So that made experimentation easy because I was able to just say, if you're in the experiment, use my system. If you're not in the experiment, use this other system. So that actually brings me to my next point, where if you can help it, don't try to cowboy a huge change into production. It would be great if all code was like that, where you could just experiment, but there actually was one place where I did have to refactor a huge piece of the module rendering system, and I've been talking a lot about the server side, where okay, like I made it so that it didn't call Jinja, it called my Node sidecar process, but on the client side, actually, there was a huge refactor that needed to happen in order for both Node and the browser to be able to call the same code. I don't know if you've run into this before, but there's kind of a new area here of, I guess some people call it isomorphic code, some people call it environment agnostic code, but basically JavaScript that can be called from both Node and the browser. A lot of people like to kind of reuse that code like we're trying to do, which presents its own problems because that JavaScript kind of almost a lot of our JavaScript actually expected a browser environment and would break if it was being called by Node. So a big refactor had to happen so that Node and the browser could call the same code. And yeah, I had to land that without trying to, without experimenting because the change was so big. So if you can help it, don't do that. But if you can't help it, here's my takeaway from that. You want to plan it in incremental stages so that if something goes wrong, you know where and how to fix it. So at first, I was actually trying to change the server side and the client side at the same time and push it out, and I got a big no. Like, don't do that. If something breaks, like, where is it gonna break? Are you gonna go look in Python code? Are you gonna go look in Node code? Are you gonna go look in browser code? Where do you think the break is gonna happen? So in rolling out these huge big changes, you just want to make sure to stage them so that when you roll something big out, if you can't experiment on it, roll out the piece that if something will break, how it might break, and where that code might be. For us, we have a lot of monitoring systems where if a lot of errors suddenly start happening after a deploy, somebody broke something during that deploy. So I did totally break stuff when I rolled out my huge client-side change, and luckily I was able to fix it very quickly because somebody stopped me from rolling out everything, and I was able to know that it was a client-side change and a client-side problem, and I was able to fix it very quickly. Had I rolled everything out at once, I would have been so lost, and I'm really glad I didn't do that. So yeah, I'm going to take a break here too to see if anybody has any questions as well.
As before, feel free to unmute yourself here or ask questions in the Hangout. Sorry, in the Q&A app. We might be safe.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I actually did have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's something maybe you can talk about towards the end of the talk, but I've gotten questions from peers when they break something. People get a little overwhelmed about that thought process, and it'd be great for you to talk about what you did to fix it. If there's time later on, like how to not be overwhelmed with actually breaking something, particularly for a major project.
Sure. Yeah, I can actually speak now about that because yeah, I broke Pinterest a few times. Yeah. So in this particular case, when I did roll out the client-side refactor, there are two big things that broke. One was the experiments that some people were doing completely broke, and they pretty much like all the people that they were exposing to this experiment and getting metrics from were actually not being exposed to the right thing. So their metrics were kind of screwed up. The second thing that happened was the search page. You try to search for something, you can't scroll down. So that was really bad. And the things that I would say about that is debugging those things while there's a breakage going on is very stressful. It's not pleasant. You're definitely kind of, working against the clock. There are people who aren't very happy. So all you can really do is just kind of take notes on how you might prevent this in the future. So for me, with the experiment thing, I actually knew exactly what was going on. I actually forgot to implement an experiment, the refactored experiments client. So I fixed that really quickly. And what was missing there were tests, which would have caught that. So definitely a lesson in making sure that your code is well tested so that when you land things, you know if something's missing or if you know that something's that was working before, it doesn't work anymore. And the other issue was just something I don't even to this day think I would have been able to catch. It was an implementation detail. It's a little too technical to really talk about, but it had to do with the way the search API or the search interfaces with our data and making sure that we were passing the right data over. So that's just something maybe testing could have also caught, but again, yeah, I think I'm not sure. Am I answering the question okay? Like I think that it's a stressful thing. And yeah, I think the advice is just like when you get over it and when you're past fixing it, and everybody's just kind of like, okay, what went wrong? How could we have prevented this in the future? It's great learning and it's great opportunity to kind of be a better engineer.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's food for thought for the community. I asked on behalf of them.
Sure, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So, all right, next slide. Okay, A/B testing. So if you can A/B test your big changes, it's amazing insight. So Pinterest has an experiment framework, like I said, where it automatically buckets a percentage of users into one, inside or outside your experiment. And there's a lot of experiments going on at the same time. So when you kind of have in your code this branch where it's like, if you're in this experiment, I'll call it experiment, nunjucks, you will go through my new nunjucks rendering system. If you're outside the experiment, you're just going to go through the normal system as before. And the fact that I had that one place allowed me to make that logic change where I could bucket you into my experiment. The cool thing is that Pinterest has this really amazing dashboard that shows all these key metrics that the company cares about. And with my experiment, I'm not doing a feature change. I'm not changing the design of anything. So the hypothesis is everything's flat, right? I'm not going to make people pin more. I'm not going to make people want to leave the site faster or stay on the site more. If metrics change, that's actually an anomaly that I'm not expecting. So all I'm doing is I'm rendering templates differently. So really the hypothesis is everything's flat. So what happened was board edits went down and there was nothing I could reproduce. Like I couldn't figure out, I used a bunch of different browsers and I tried to reproduce a bug and I couldn't find any bugs inside my experiment. So I asked the experiment people, I'm saying, everything's flat except for board edit. Do I have to worry about that? And they said, yes, you have to worry about that. There wasn't any way I could ship my experiment if some metric was down. So I actually found out through some pretty intensive debugging that there was a bug. And the way I found out was I actually put stats in production code to narrow down at what layer the bug was happening. So here's a strategy that you can try is there's an open source statistical, I guess, I don't know, visualization or graphic called StatsD, and I was able to put points in my code that would increment if that code path was hit. So I had some nice graphs of how many people were hitting this piece of code at any given point in time, and those graphs over time gave me a picture of deltas between people in my experiment and people outside my experiment. So I noticed that at the data layer, it was true that my experiment people were editing boards like around 5 to 7% less than the people outside my experiment. So I knew it wasn't a problem at the data layer. And then in the JavaScript, I also had graphs showing that at the JavaScript layer even, there was that delta as well. So it definitely had to do with template rendering, but I couldn't reproduce it. And now this is kind of more luck. Like I actually got a bug from a different area of the site not related to board edits where elements were appearing in weird places on the screen only in certain browsers. So that was an aha moment, and fixing that bug actually resolved the board edit bug or the board edit regression. And I was able to see my metrics kind of start to consolidate, and the delta was disappearing. So actually I was able to even monitor as the deploy went out that yay, people are now editing boards at the same rate inside and outside the experiment. So so just I guess just the value of experimenting and making sure that things don't break. Even when I couldn't reproduce it, I knew something was broken. That was pretty amazing, and that probably saved a lot of really bad pinning experiences. So the takeaway here is just, if you don't have a framework in place, just something to think about to try and identify metrics that matter and just monitor those metrics after exposing a percentage of users to your new code. That turned out to be really important when rolling out this stage. Okay, and then profiling. So performance is really important as well. What I noticed in my experiment as well is that the page load time went down a whole second, which is unacceptable. That's really bad to take away the quality of the speed like that. So again, debugging this was really important, and solving this was really important. And here are just some things I did. I profiled pretty much everything about my rendering system. I profiled in Python, and the Python side, like calling the new system, like the network calls, all that stuff, how long they took. I profiled the node side. And there were two ways that I did it. One was just manual timing statements. Like I wanted to profile every line of code that I was pretty much writing to kind of compare between Jinja and Nenjux what was slower. And I noticed a really big chunk of time that was slower on the Python side between the two rendering systems, and was able to do a little bit of refactoring there to make that faster. There's also logging again, using StatsD again. I'm able to, in this on the right side, the logging to an external stat service, this stat client is something that we have at Pinterest. We have a StatsD service that outputs graphs. So I'm able to actually put timing statements here that output the time out to the service, and it gives me a nice graph of like how long these things are taking. So here you can see like some stuff in all four of these examples is just some arbitrary function that's doing some things, and I'm just like putting timing statements before to capture the time right before, then right when when some stuff concludes, just printing out the rest or printing out the time that it took. You'll have to do some strange, some different things if you're running asynchronous code or if you're working with greenlets or something like that. So, and there's a lot of profiling tools, and node flame graphs are great for CPU stuff. You can Google all that stuff. There's a lot of different strategies for profiling, but this is like this is the one I think I used the most to just kind of get a really quick profile of everything that was happening in my application. So just knowing how well my code performed against the old system and profiling to know what parts take how long is really important. And what you can measure is often a great way of knowing what you need to fix. So before this project, I'd never profiled anything. I'd never really worried about performance before, and when I saw this, I was pretty freaked out. So, and people were just saying, yeah, you can't ship that. That's not going to fly. So having to solve that really forced me to learn about how to worry about the time that code takes to execute, and in a real life way, not just in a O of N way. Okay, and then I think this is the last one. Oh no, this is the second to last one. So I'll take a break here and just see if does anybody have any questions at this point.
As before, feel free to just unmute yourself, or you can ask in the Q&A app.
When you were doing your refactoring to get your time back down, what exactly types of refactoring did you have to do? So did you have to think about data structures and I'm going to use a hash because a hash is quicker or whatever? Is that the kind of thing that you had to do?
No, actually, I thought that might be something that would have been I would have uncovered oh, I was maybe using a bad data structure, but it's actually very specific to Python, the language. So one thing actually with this context, this might actually be worth explaining just for kicks. So Python, when it was running Jinja, right, it's just importing a Jinja package and it's just running Jinja code, right? So it's all in process. It's all just Python calling Python. But when Python is calling Node, it's actually doing so over a network interface. So it's actually making an HTTP call. And what happens is that's by using, so with Jinja, that's blocking code, right? You're blocking the process when you're calling Jinja. So when Jinja takes a long time to render, that process is kind of blocked, right? But when Python calls Node, that's a network call. So you can actually kind of parallelize, well, not parallelize, but use greenlets to faux parallelize that. So basically, I found an optimization where when Python calls Node, I can actually fire off a whole bunch of greenlit workers to make parallel requests to Node, and they would just come back. And when those workers resolved, I could do rendering that way. Whereas before, I was blocking on those calls. So in a way, having Python actually call Node was good for the system because it was able to then fire off all these parallel requests asynchronously, whereas with Jinja, it would have to wait until each one's done. So so that was just the way, that was just something that I found out after talking. I actually talked to an SRE who talked a little bit about, he mentioned something about, oh yeah, network calls and greenlets doesn't have to block the thread, and that was oh, wait, oh, that's what I'm doing with my system. Oh, I could totally use that. And then that's when I went back to my code and I tried it, and it made it I got a gain of 850 milliseconds from that. So that was an awesome performance improvement. And actually, when we do switch from Nunjucks to React, the speed at which React server-side renders a template will more than make up for, the hypothesis is will more than make up for the remaining delta. So so that's kind of how we justified the speed regression. But knowing that thing about Python, and I would have never have known that thing about Python without talking to the SRE who just had done his own debugging and done something similar and had a presentation about that. So it's kind of serendipitous to be able to loop that back into the project. But yeah, thanks for asking.
Thanks.
Always be learning, always be listening.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so last two things. Automated testing, huge. The performance and the board edit, that stuff, that affects pinners, and we definitely don't want users to have a bad experience. But at the same time, while we're rolling out this huge change, we also don't want developers to be having a bad experience too. And we also don't want developers to break our code. So there were actually a lot of things that I had to do to make sure that developers were kind of going along with the things that I needed them to do in order to make this successful. There were actually a lot of template changes. I had to make code mods across the whole repository to make sure that these templates could be read by Nunjucks, and some of the templates were actually legacy templates that were only being read by Jinja. I'm not going to go into that. That's just a whole nother wormhole or a whole nother can of worms. But basically, I had to make sure that a lot of developers were doing the right thing. And there were usages of the template that they could have committed that would have broken my system completely. And while an experiment is going on, of course, 2 different systems are running at the same time. So this percentage of users are going to see a perfectly fine experience, but the people that are in my experiment, if you do something that breaks my system, are going to have a bad experience and therefore screw up the metrics. And it may not actually be a reflection of the system. It may be just some developer didn't know that this was the new right thing to do, which is really important because a lot of the times with a big organization of developers and you're making a platform change, you do want developers to actually change the way that they're used to developing. And it's really difficult to go to each one and yell at them or look over their shoulder and make sure that they're coding the right way. So automated testing, I learned a lot at this company about linters, which yell at you even if you just try to build. It'll just break your build because it'll give an error that you can customize and that you can say, like, hey, you did this wrong, don't do it, you do this instead. So that's really it's not really punitive, it's more actually educational for developers because then they can know what the new rule is very quickly and easily without having to read anything. They just kind of run into it. And then also testing obviously is really important. So that was linters, and linters basically like lint your code and set, there's a lot of common linters out there like JSHint or ESLint that make sure your semicolons are in the right places and that all variables are declared, for example. But ESLint especially has the ability for you to actually implement your own custom rules where you can tell or you can create a rule that parses or that traverses the syntax tree and finds conditions where you can throw an error. I actually wrote Nunjucks linter that lints templates. So there's actually no Nunjucks linter out there. So I wrote one and basically was able to add a whole bunch of rules to make sure that your template was JavaScript safe and not using any Python stuff that wouldn't have worked in JavaScript. So learning about linters, like writing a linter, was awesome. That was really cool. And then learning about automated testing was really cool too because again, we want to make sure the templates look the same, like no matter what system we're using. So I had an automated test that went through every single template every time you tried to commit a change and made sure they were all the same. And if they weren't, it would throw an error because that means that would have broken something in my experiment. So this is great. Just learning about how to make things automatically do things for you is really great. So yeah, automate your yelling. They try to land something that will break your system. They should be prevented by tests and linters. And then finally, the last one, monitoring and alerts. So this is like literally a graph. This is like the gist of what a graph looks like when something is going really wrong. So basically, when we spawned a new service like Node, right? It's another process that's serving templates. That's just a new process to kind of worry about, right? So what I needed to do was I needed some way to track and make sure across like the many, many hosts that are serving Pinterest.com that all the node processes on them are really healthy. So how do you do that? I again used an external graphing service to just increment once when the node service was giving back a response, like a 200 successful response or a 500 error response. And once that got released into production, I started getting numbers back. I set a threshold and make sure that, okay, this is the normal number of 200s that I should be expecting at any given point in time. If it ever goes down below that, there's something wrong. And again, I did that also for, it wouldn't be shown here, but like a different kind of graph where it's like, okay, here are the number of 500s that we deem acceptable. If it spikes, there's something wrong. And anytime that threshold is breached, I would get a call by a robot. So like PagerDuty is a service that we use where, you know, it'll tell me, hey, like watch out, nodes going down, or watch out, like somebody committed some code that got past our tests and linters that are causing 500 errors to spike, so you better watch out for this. So the takeaway here is just make sure you can see when errors happen on production and what normal looks like, and when something abnormal happens, make sure you know about it no matter the hour. So there was one time Amazon service went down, and had nothing to do with our code, had nothing to do with our infrastructure. It was just a vendor that we rely on was down for a little bit, and I got a call at like 11 p.m. and I'm just like, oh my God, what happened? So it was nice to know that it was working. On the flip side of that, before I had all this implemented, I did have an experiment that was specific to SEO. So whenever we touch HTML, we should do an SEO experiment because we want to make sure that Google still likes us after our change. And what happened was everything was going great. The bots that were in my experiment were happy. But then suddenly over the weekend, again, before I had any of this monitoring happening, somehow, like I didn't even know until Tuesday morning, I'm ashamed to say, but I saw these metrics were just totally bombing. And I saw this like right during a deploy, and for some reason, like that, something in that deploy fixed it, and I'll never know what, because I had no monitoring. The logs were only being kept around for like 10 hours. We've since changed that to a week. So yeah, the errors that were happening were just long gone, and so yeah, I'll just never know. It's going to haunt me to this day what happened that weekend. But yeah, there's no there was nothing to debug. There was nothing to look at. So, and there was nothing let me know that happened. And those bots took a while to recover too. So yeah, they weren't happy, and I wasn't happy, so an SEO team wasn't happy. So yeah, it's just important when you make changes like these to know what normal is and make sure that you know what happens or what to do when things go bad. Cool.
When good code goes bad.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
we have time here for for a last little batch of questions from anyone out there, and then
Sure.
yeah, let's make this happen. Who's up?
Andy. So coming from freelancing and coming into a team, and you obviously ran into more larger problems with larger projects. Were there times where it was overwhelming? But then also times that did you feel like you had more support from a team? I mean, I've been freelancing for a couple of years now, and a lot of this is very familiar to me on a small scale. Middle of the night or middle of the day, I'm doing something else. I'm working my other job, and there's a problem. So I guess I'm just curious how it was moving into more of a team development.
Sure, yeah. I feel you. It is like night and day. Like freelancing was so crazy. I remember working like through Christmas. There's no mercy. When things go down, it's just on you. And it's great because you have the freedom. You don't have to deal with like office politics. You don't have to deal with land grabbing. You don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, on a project like this where it was a huge platform change and a lot of people were like kind of waiting for this, like it's a lot of pressure too. So it was great to have the support of the people. Like I've again never done a big project like this before, and people trusted me to do it, and I am forever grateful for that. I think I learned so much, and I don't think that at a freelance level or at like an agency, it's kind of like sink or swim, right? Like you're doing it, or even at an agency, it's like they pick the people who can do it. They're not going to take risks on somebody who maybe didn't, hadn't done this before or something like that sometimes. So I would say like there's something cool about having like extra resources that can like help you and support you. Whereas a freelancer, I feel like you are so responsible for everything, and that's a great opportunity for growth. But it's also very like, like I got to do this. Like, yeah, the support is really nice, and I think that's kind of why I grew out, or I seeked out a team more. Yeah, maybe one day when I'm, more comfortable, I might go back to freelancing. But right now, I feel like I have so much to learn still.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so I do hate to cut it short, but we are actually at the end of our time here, and so I think typically the last thing that we cover here is actually from you, which is if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who's just getting started, who's climbing the learning curve, who's pushing that boulder up the hill before it starts rolling down again,
Yeah.
if it ever does, what advice do you offer someone who's in that position?
Well, I'm still here. I feel like I'm still doing that. I think that I don't know. It's hard for me to say. Just learning all you can, and just everyone's going to do it differently. I would say that there is an element of like, especially at a company where, I guess the pros of a freelancer is that you're on your own, you're doing, you're your own bar, you kind of like have your own bar. And at a company like this, I'm always kind of looking around and seeing like, oh, like I'm inspired by so many people around me. So just remembering that everyone's journey is different, and like it's pretty exciting, like learning, keeping up with everything that's going on. Just enjoy it, enjoy the curiosity, and enjoy the journey, and I think it'll take you, as long as it still gives you joy, like I think it'll take you places in your career.
Beautiful. That's a great note to go out on. So, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else who's here, everyone who's out there, you guys, thank you all. We will be back when we're back. This is a regular event, so join us next time. Jessica, if people want to thank you, how do they get in touch? If you're comfortable putting anything on public, like your Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. My website is jessicachanstudios.com. There's a contact me link there. There's Twitter at MissEJCat. Feel free to tweet me. I'm actually not on Twitter that much, but yeah, I'll be more diligent about it.
Okay. Well, and
right.
we'll post up the slides on the transcript as well on the blog. So visit vikingcodeschool.com/blog and you'll see that. Otherwise, thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great night.
Bye.